If you'd like to grow closer and feel more connected to the most important people in your life, particularly your partner, cultivating emotional intimacy is the key. And cultivating true, authentic intimacy requires a lot of strength and can honestly be harder than it sounds because of the many obstacles, internal and external, that can block intimacy. In today's episode, you'll learn what real intimacy is and how to develop it in your relationships, but also develop the capacity to create it in yourself. And hello, if this is your first time listening, I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I am a psychologist, I'm a marriage and family therapist, a board certified coach, and the founder of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching, and the very grateful host of this podcast. I love making these for you. If you're a growth oriented person hoping to create more love, happiness, and success in your life, I do these for you just to support you on your journey of growth, my little way of throwing bottles into the ocean. And I always try to create these episodes for you. Thank you for all of my listeners who have gotten in touch with me to let me know, what's on your mind. I've heard from you on Instagram, through YouTube, all the usual social channels, and just keep it coming. I love hearing your questions and really just like what's going on in your life, what's important to you, because then I can build podcasts for you specifically, and we will create magic together. So thank you. So let's just dive into today's topic. Today we are going deeply into a subject that's really at the heart of a lot of relationships. And also, I have to say, as a marriage counselor, at the core of a lot of pain when it comes to intimate relationships, because people feeling a lack of the emotional intimacy that they're really craving. I mean, that's often a lot of times why people come into marriage counseling or couples counseling. It's just they feel disconnected, right? And so the goal of the work is to create increased emotional intimacy. And my hope is that by the end of today's episode, you'll get some clarity on what gets in the way of emotional intimacy, because I think understanding those obstacles is oftentimes the first step in being able to change them. But also, I hope you'll get just some clarity and some guidance about where to work, either in your relationship on your own or with the support of a good marriage counselor or relationship coach to be a process guide on this journey. So I have a number of things prepared for you. So you guys know on YouTube, I've been doing a audio only version of this podcast for years and have recently gotten into the YouTube game. So doing this by video primarily. For those of you who are usual audio listeners, you should come hang out with me on YouTube because I'm putting together like little presentations for you. We have slides, there's like stuff to talk about, and you can come and basically hang out with me in my office. So come connect with me on YouTube. That is where the party is these days. But really, the first thing that we should talk about is really like what emotional intimacy is and why it is so important. So jumping right in, because, and the reason that I really do want to talk about this piece first, one of the things that I often see as a marriage counselor with two partners, one person can often really desire to feel closer in their relationship, wanting more intimacy. And if the other person doesn't really understand why or what it means or the outcomes that it can create, there's like a difference in motivation to create change in this area that can really get in the way of the work itself. So I think understanding what emotional intimacy is and why it's important is actually the first step in creating positive change in this area. So So if you'll allow me, I mean, my working definition of emotional intimacy is, and how I understand it to be in terms of importance is it's really like the cornerstone of any healthy and thriving relationship. It's the deep, soulful, even connection that binds us to our loved ones. I mean, when we have emotional intimacy with another person, it feels so special and so important and so rare, I guess is the way to say it. It creates this sense of that you're just connected to an irreplaceable other, someone who knows you and gets you, understands you, cares about you on really uniquely deep levels. I mean, that's really what like loving relationships are all about. If you don't have that in a relationship, even if it's fine on a lot of levels, it's compatible, there's not fighting, you're good life partners in some ways. If it's hollow at that core though, it's still not going to be really either of you want or truly need it to be or what you deserve. And it is not easy to create this. I'll tell you right now, in case you only have a couple minutes to listen, take away this one thing and you can be done with the whole podcast, is that emotional intimacy does not just happen. It's something that needs to be created intentionally, and it requires effort. Like, it can be difficult to do this. So knowing how to, and then doing that intentionally is really the path to creating the kind of relationship that you do want. So, in today's episode, it's all about breaking down the complexities of emotional intimacy, understanding its various forms because it kind of shows up in different costumes, and then learning how to overcome the barriers that will stand in your way of creating this so that you feel empowered around it and are able to do it. Okay, so first of all, diving in, what is emotional intimacy? I mean, if we break it down into its most simple components, it's really the ability to get close to other people. I mean, in particular, like one irreplaceable other, right? But in a way that allows you to be seen for who and what you truly are. And this part is really about vulnerability. The willingness to expose your innermost thoughts and feelings to another person. But here is the paradox: true intimacy requires vulnerability. You have to take a risk and put yourself out there if you want to be known. But that vulnerability itself can trigger a lot of anxiety, which leads us to resort to these self protective behaviors that close us down, shut other people out, keep us safe emotionally, but also obstruct intimacy from being able to happen. It's also true that there are different kinds of intimacy, and that is something that's important to be considered because, kind of like love languages, if people are oriented around different kinds of intimacy as being the most meaningful for them, they may be actually attempting to create intimacy with another person in a way that is just not really connecting on the other side. So, for this reason, it's important to just unpack this a little bit. But the two primary languages of intimacy essentially are physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. And so, believe it or not, while physical intimacy, including like sexual closeness, is important and is very meaningful, and I think a cornerstone of a lot of intimate relationships, many times achieving sexual intimacy feels much easier for people than creating true emotional intimacy. I talk to clients all the time who find emotional intimacy more challenging to cultivate because it feels scarier, like more fraught, riskier. Um, and trust and safety play a vital role in this form of connection. That's also true with physical intimacy, but when you really want to go in deeply to emotional intimacy with another human, that emotional safety and trust is really vital. So, I just wanted to talk through a couple aspects of that. But also, now let's talk about some of the factors at play when it comes to developing emotional intimacy. Like, we all want that, or actually, that's not true. There are some people who prefer not to have emotional intimacy in their life because of the level of anxiety and vulnerability that creates. Um, which is okay. If you know that about yourself, and if you make an intentional choice to build a life in alignment with that preference, totally cool. You can do that. But it's also important to know that about yourself and be able to communicate that to a prospective partner so that they understand what kind of relationship you're available to have with them. And then they can make informed choices on the other side about whether or not that's the kind of relationship that they want. Because if somebody else has different hopes for connection than you want, it is you'll probably be fine, but they're going to suffer trying to create this kind of connection with you. It can damage them emotionally over time. So I just wanted to say that out loud. Consent is everything, but you have to know yourself and be able to articulate it before you can, give somebody else the opportunity to have real consent around what they're signing up for when it comes to having a relationship with you. But I digress. If you are a person who is interested in developing more emotional intimacy in your relationships, the first thing to know is it really takes a lot of courage and also intention. I like to imagine levels of intimacy in relationships as a way of understanding where we can go with this. It's like if you imagine your life as a house with different levels of closeness and boundaries, right? Like there's a little picket fence and a sidewalk, and like strangers stay outside the fence and on the sidewalk. Acquaintances might, stop at the gate or come into the yard, but they're not coming into the house. Other people, you might invite over for a party, but it's not like an intimate connection. Other friends, they might hang out with you in the kitchen. They might know where the tea bags are and just wander in and help themselves. Like that is a different level of intimacy. And then, of course, there's deeper intimacy, people that we bring into our metaphorical bedroom, right? People that know what's in the basement, like that's deep intimacy. But understanding that different people in your life can kind of fall into those different categories helps you understand like what to expect with different levels of intimacy in relationships. And it also, I think, empowers you to move people either closer in, if that's something that you want, or if you've had experiences with them that have taught you that they're not actually a good person to try to be intimate with. Maybe they're not as trustworthy as you need them to be, or they aren't as emotionally safe as you need them to be. You can move them back out again. Maintain a relationship. It's totally fine. You don't have to be mad at anybody, but you're not going to invite everybody that you invite to a party into the bedroom or into the basement. So it's just being able to have discernment and make empowered choices in those areas. But to invite somebody into the deepest parts of your life, like a best friend or a partner, it's important to know that one of the main skills in creating that is first having discernment in how to choose trustworthy and emotionally safe individuals. And don't jump into that pool too soon. It takes a long time to get to know who people really are. And one of the things that I commonly see in my role as a therapist, or actually I see this a fair amount as a dating coach, people doing a cannonball into the deep end of the pool with somebody that they don't know very well and like really opening themselves up in emotionally vulnerable and intimate ways without having yet discovered whether or not this is an appropriate person to do that with. And they wind up or disappointed. And, there's, I think, a lot of really important personal growth work to be done, very empowering work to be done around helping people slow down and be able to decide for themselves who is a safe person, who isn't, because it creates more positive experiences in the long run. The people that are coming into the bedroom or the basement have earned the right to be there, and just understanding that not everybody does, I think, can be really important. So, um, those are important things to consider, just like baseline skills if you want a life full of emotional intimacy. And it's also important for all of us to understand what the barriers to emotional intimacy are. I mean, assuming that you are with someone who is, generally speaking, emotionally safe and trustworthy, there are relational barriers that can start to come up that will obstruct emotional intimacy. So, for example, things like fear and anxiety are very real, particularly related to moments when we kind of need to decide, do we want to be vulnerable, open up, take a risk, be known, be seen, possibly be rejected or judged, right? These are scary. And our historical life experiences can impact how we handle those moments. So, for example, if you have had negative experiences with people in the past where you did feel hurt or judged or rejected, especially if it was by people that, um, had an important place in your life, certainly like a parent or a caregiver. But also, I've talked to so many people as a therapist who went through vulnerable stages, like in often early adolescence, like things that happened with friends in early adolescence, being rejected by peers or having been bullied. People well into their 30s can still subconsciously be holding on to those experiences because they're really quite traumatic on an emotional level, and it's such like a tender part of our lives that it's worth exploring, particularly if it's getting in the way of being able to develop emotionally intimate relationships as an adult. So, I mean, that's also kind of like what vulnerability, like if you're doing it right, you should feel a little bit anxious because it's special. You're sharing something about yourself that not everybody knows. So that's part of it. And being able to manage that anxiety is one of the skills that needs to be developed in order to cultivate the kinds of intimate relationships that you want. Also, it should be said that attachment styles can also be a factor here. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me talk at length on previous episodes about how our attachment styles influence how we perceive emotional closeness. If we desire emotional closeness, the degree to which we feel threatened by emotional closeness, like if there's avoidant attachment tendencies. But also, on the other side, for somebody with an anxious attachment style, they want a level of emotional intimacy that may actually feel uncomfortable for people who are more in that secure range. So just, using it as an opportunity not to judge or criticize yourself, but something to be aware of. Like, what are my expectations for intimacy in relationships? And maybe we should have some, courageous conversations about differences in that area. If my partner feels comfortable with a different level of emotional intimacy than I do, it can be very easy to get mad at people for not wanting the same kind of intimacy that you do. But I think it's important to remember that there's always a reason for that. And it can be a marvelous growth opportunity for any relationship to sit down either together on your own or with the support of a really good marriage counselor to unpack some of that. I mean, it can go into cultural differences from your families of origin or, historical life experiences that develop these expectations. But I think also important to have appreciation and respect for the fact that not everybody has had positive experiences with people that they trusted and who wound up hurting them in a way that made emotional intimacy feel difficult and particularly threatening for them as an adult. I think that we don't consider the privilege of having positive relationship experiences like throughout our lifespan as a privilege, but it really is. And I think just having compassion for the fact that there are a lot of people in this world that are carrying scars and wounds. And, if you're in a relationship with somebody and maybe you're feeling angry that they're not as emotionally intimate with you as you'd like them to be, here's a moment to be respectfully curious about why that makes sense and devote yourself to becoming the kind of emotionally safe and trustworthy person where they could actually have a corrective emotional experience with you. They could open up and start to heal through your relationship. Now, I will tell you, we're actually talking about fairly deep work right now, particularly if there's been relational trauma in someone's past. This would be a fantastic opportunity to get connected with a very good licensed marriage and family therapist who's well versed in attachment theory and relational dynamics, who can support both of you through this kind of healing work. So if you suspect that something like that is going on as an obstacle, it's important to get support with that, because invitations to intimacy will create more anxiety and feelings of fear in these situations. And there is a tendency for reactivity and withdrawal because of that. So part of the reason of getting connected with a good marriage counselor to guide you through this is because it creates like a layer of emotional safety that will help both of you stay in the ring, have a container to talk about really challenging things in a safe way, and kind of like hold that door open, right? Like, so as a marriage counselor, we're there, it's limited. We're there for 45 minutes. So like people know it's going to end, like, woo, let me get out of here. Sometimes, not always. We actually have a lot of fun. There's good times too. But particularly in the beginning stages of this work, it can be really important because the tendency is to avoid or withdraw or shut down or react and defend. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that if you try to have these conversations with your partner and they feel very hard, or like you can't, it's okay. It doesn't mean that there's not hope for your relationship. It just means that you guys need more support. So pro tip right there. But also, something that is important to consider as a obstacle to emotional intimacy is the amount of shame that people can often carry, like on the inside. There are many people, I've worked with a lot of them, and I think, we can all relate to this experience where we worry, like, if people really knew who I was, all my flaws, what a weirdo I am, like all the quirks, would they still like me or want to be with me? Like if somebody really knew me. And that is such a scary thing to consider. And particularly if you are vulnerable to a lot of internal, like inner critic kind of activity, if your mental narrative about yourself is fairly negative, this little voice in your head talking about everything you're not, and if only you did this better, and here are all the reasons why you're failing as a human and all this stuff, like, feeling bad about yourself, struggling with low self-esteem, um, that contributes to this expectation that you're really not quite as good as other people. And if people really knew you, they wouldn't like you. And because of that belief, that false belief, that mindset that can be changed, it can be hard to be authentic with other people because of that expectation of rejection. So, the path forward here, if you want to have more emotionally intimate relationships, it requires feeling safe enough within yourself to be vulnerable with other people. And that requires, if you have a lot of like self shame going on, um, changing your relationship with yourself first. You need to develop a more emotionally safe relationship between you and yourself where you feel more secure internally. And only then will you feel confident enough to share your real self with other people. So many layers of growth when it comes to this. And going back to the beginning, I said that this could be challenging work, right? But this is why, is that it goes really deep. And then very lastly, one significant obstacle to emotional intimacy that we must discuss is emotional safety. I can't tell you how many times I have sat in the room as a marriage counselor with a couple where one person is demanding in a very angry and aggressive way that the other person be more emotionally vulnerable with them or else. And I bring this up because understandably, like, and we unpack it, right? Like underneath the anger, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, there's this like, don't you love me kind of feeling. And we can get to that with really good evidence based forms of therapy that can help unpack that. So it's a solvable problem. However, it's important to know that in order for someone to like step into that ring of vulnerability with you, they need to feel safe with you and there needs to be trust there. So just another piece is that if you would like to have more emotionally intimate relationships, it's worth considering and just doing some authentic self-reflection. How emotionally safe does it feel to be with me? Do I come across as judgmental, critical, rejecting? Like if somebody tells me something about themselves that is like kind of tender for them, am I going to minimize it or, displace blame or whatever, react to that in a way that makes somebody on the other side think, never doing that again and shut down rather than open up. So it's not just about somebody else opening up to you, although that's absolutely part of it, but like how are you creating the environment that makes it easy and appealing for somebody else to open up to you? That goes back to these relational dynamics, right? It's how are people reacting to us? And then by managing how we're showing up, that's how we can potentially influence the behavior of others. Again, this gets very complex and there can be a lot of blind spots there. Like people often legitimately have no idea how they're being experienced by others, even their partner, many times until they get into the office. We start unpacking these things and, peeling the onion and having authentic conversations about things like emotional safety and how we're being perceived by each other that are often quite new. I mean, literally new information to people on both sides. So on the other on the other side of that, if you're in a relationship with somebody who does not feel emotionally safe to you, they might not know that. Seriously. And it would be important for you, and actually a moment of brave vulnerability to, in a non-hostile or threatening way, say, I hear you say that you want us to feel closer. And oftentimes I experience you as like when I do open up to you, it doesn't feel good to me. I feel rejected or judged or criticized or, told to feel differently or that my experience isn't true. I mean, all kinds of stuff, and have that conversation and highlight it as a very important opportunity for growth in your relationship. Because if lack of emotional safety is present, it will always interfere with emotional intimacy. And so just knowing where to work, I think, can be really empowering there. And so I hope that just a review of these obstacles have been helpful. But we're also not here to just uncover problems, right? We're here to talk about solutions. And so, while it is important to developing this that we talk about the obstacles, because if we aren't aware of those, working on the positive pieces of this won't be successful because there will still be like these negative um, things that will like kind of, it's like you're pouring something in the top of a funnel and then it's coming out the bottom. So we have to work on this from both ends. Um, but there are also a lot of really fun things that we can all do in our relationships to cultivate the kind of connection that we want and feel like we're growing closer to the people who are most important to us. So, just to review some of them, um, to cultivate emotional intimacy in a really active way, it's important to focus on a few different things. One of them, and possibly one of the most important, is something called emotional attunement, which sounds like kind of a weird, technical phrase. But what emotional attunement is related to empathy and emotional intelligence. It's the ability to really understand somebody else's experience and be with them in that experience. So, for example, an example of emotional attunement, like if I've had a hard day, like low stakes, to show up and say to somebody, my husband, like, I had a really rough day. But to show up and say, I had a really rough day because I had an uncomfortable exchange with a coworker or my boss. And I think I might have made a mistake. I'm actually not proud of how I showed up in this moment. I maybe learned something about myself that didn't feel great for me, but maybe how I'm being experienced by others or how I let somebody down. And I feel pretty bad about that. Yeah. It's like a whole different level of sharing, right? But emotional attunement means that you have created a space with your partner where they are listening to you, hearing what you're saying, and also have a sense of how you're feeling. It's related to empathy, being able to really understand what it feels like to be another person accurately. But that also a piece of emotional attunement is um, what would feel safe right now. And a lot of times it's really just listening. It can be tempting for all of us, especially when someone we love is hurting, to jump into fix it or problem solving mode, or, oh, here are all the reasons why you're probably wrong about that, right? In those moments, we think we're being helpful. Somebody's hurting. We have a different perspective. And if they believed what we believed, they wouldn't feel badly anymore. So we are here to rescue them from their bad feelings. And in doing so, not really understanding the lost opportunity for intimacy, connection, like a shared experience, taking a relationship to a deeper level, you know? So, an example of using attunement in that moment would be able to scroll back through your own life experiences and say, that is hard. I felt that way before, and it felt really bad. It brought up a lot of stuff for me. And I'm sorry that you are having that experience today. Let me give you a big hug, right? No other action is required, but it's really thinking about, how would I like somebody to respond to me in this moment? The golden rule. Or better yet, with what I know about my partner, like really know about them, how would they feel loved by me in this moment? Even if that's different than what I might want in this moment, I'm going to respond to them in a way that would feel loving for them. That is the platinum rule of relationships. And so this kind of self-awareness is really key and goes into emotional intelligence skills. And again, I have a number of podcasts that do a deep dive into emotional intelligence, what it is, how to build it in yourself. Um, but, quickly, emotional intelligence is self-awareness, self-management, other awareness, and other management. So self-awareness, I'm feeling a tendency to jump in and fix or explain away these feelings because I want to make my partner feel better. Self-management, that's probably my own anxiety, and I'm going to come back down and be in a place where I can be emotionally responsive to my partner in a way that feels good for them. Once I'm in a better place, okay, let me understand how you're really feeling, and then modifying your responses in a way that would feel really good for your partner. These are learned skills. A very small percentage of the world comes from the kind of privileged background where they were intentionally taught how to do this, either, intentionally and consciously, or through just, non-conscious experiences that they had with emotionally safe, highly emotionally intelligent parents or other people in their lives who were modeling how to do this. A really important growth opportunity for most adults is learning how to do that. And that's what emotional intelligence coaching is for. So I just wanted to say this isn't like an all or nothing thing. Either you have it or you don't. This is a wonderful opportunity to practice a growth mindset. I have not yet had the opportunity to learn how to do that well. And I am capable of learning and growing. And this is an important area for me to invest time and energy in because I want to be better at this. That's a growth mindset. So, other ways that we can cultivate emotional intimacy in our relationships is to be very focused on creating emotional safety for other people in our lives. And part of that is understanding different comfort levels with closeness and intimacy. And again, getting curious about what the person on the other side wants and expects in relationships so that hopefully you can talk about that and ideally, build a bridge to the center of whatever that is. And then additionally, in order to cultivate emotional intimacy, it's not just creating an emotionally safe environment, it is practicing self-aware and appropriate vulnerability. Being the brave one that goes first, because intimacy is typically created in stages, right? There's this reciprocal disclosure on each side. And so being brave and saying, this makes me feel a little shy to tell you this about myself, but here's what's actually going on with me. And in new relationships, doing that slowly. So we don't, take the elevator straight into the basement and tell them about all the horrible, dark things or difficult things. It's like testing that out a little bit in safe ways, so that you have the opportunity to see how people react. Are they safe and trustworthy people? So that then you can make decisions about whether or not you want to get into deeper levels of vulnerability and intimacy with them. That goes back to that discernment process. That's how that works. And also, creating spaces and invitations for other people to step into the ring of vulnerability with you and being very careful to intentionally manage your response to them. And I think have a ton of respect for like the sacred moment that you're experiencing and that this awareness that how you respond can either keep that door open or open it up further or shut that door and create an experience of mistrust that will make it difficult to open that door in the future. So how you respond needs to be understood very, very intentionally. Okay, so additionally, the other thing that we need to talk about is just the elephant in the room, and that is the anxiety that will often accompany increasing intimacy. We've talked about this a little, this existential terror, like letting somebody know all the things about you. Um, it feels really scary. It feels like, you've just taken your heart out of your chest and handed it to another person. And it requires a ton of courage to do that, and also good judgment. You don't want to do that with just anybody, but when you found your person and we're doing it, it is through this kind of bravery that a unique bond is formed, and one that can feel really irreplaceable. Um, the other thing I'll just leave you with is to not underestimate again how scary it is for some people, and to have a lot of compassion for that, particularly if there's a shame component, and just to be really gentle with other people that you would like to have a closer relationship with, knowing that it may legitimately not feel as easy for them to do that as it does for you. But talking about that, even just talking about those differences can be a really vulnerable and connecting conversation if you handle it with compassion. So, lastly, I want to leave you with just a couple of recommendations, like takeaways, some action items, some things that you can do. So, different strategies that you can use is just understanding that it's very common in relationships to have some struggles around this. Again, going back to this idea that people have differences, people have different comfort levels, people have different expectations, and figuring out where those edges are is often an important growth area for particularly like a couple in a long-term relationship. And you will learn so much about yourself and your partner if you do this work well. And if you handle it well, you will create emotional intimacy through the work, right? And if you've resonated to parts of this talk where I've been talking about like using discernment and like testing people and making informed decisions, that might actually be an important growth area for you. If you're thinking back to a string of untrustworthy, emotionally unsafe people who, traumatized you when you tried to be vulnerable with them, I mean, consider whether or not learning how to have healthy boundaries and be empowered around making decisions about who's trustworthy and who isn't. That might be a really important growth area for you. Another important growth area, working on that emotional safety ability within yourself, emotional intelligence skills to help you manage yourself, be self-aware, and also be responsive and empathetic in your interactions. And these can all be fantastic opportunities to get professional guidance, particularly from marriage and family therapists. Ideally, it would be from a marriage and family therapist who specializes in relational work, remembering that MFTs like myself have a very different education, very different training than a psychologist, than a licensed professional counselor, and are really like deeply attuned to these relational dynamics that we've been talking about today. Most therapists, especially those coming from a clinical mental health background or a discipline of psychology that is more focused on individual psychology, are not going to be understanding in the same way the things that I'm talking with you about. And I'm saying this with full respect. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm also a licensed psychologist. So, I went through the educational program for an MFT, the whole training program, became licensed, all the things. And I also did that as a psychologist, like a separate degree, separate licensure process. And I could just tell you from experience that if I was relying only on my training and development as a psychologist, I would not know what I know about how to help people with the things that we're talking about today. I gained a different skill set through that education that's also very valuable and important, and I don't want to discount it, but like getting the right kind of help really matters. And I want to put that out there because I very often see people with a very sincere intention to get help and do this work unknowingly connect with the wrong kind of helper, one who's actually not able to help them achieve these specific kinds of goals. And so they walk away from that either, having just wasted a lot of time and money, or not having had the growth experience that they wanted and needed, which is a lost opportunity. But sometimes even worse, walking away from it feeling badly about themselves, like they tried to grow and it didn't work, so it must be their fault. So just know that who you work with really matters a lot in terms of your outcomes. You don't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail on the wall, and just so get the right kind of help. If it is helpful for you in this process of figuring out like who to work with, I have a bunch of articles that I've written on this topic just to educate you or the rest of the public, because this is something that I'm really passionate about. But if you want to come to growingself.com and access some of those free resources on my website, there's a whole knowledge base, and you can find articles about how to choose the right therapist, how to choose the right counselor. How to choose the right marriage counselor. Also, check out evidence-based practices to learn about the different approaches that different helping professionals kind of draw upon. Because again, you could have two psychologists with the same degree from the same school, even the same license, but who have a very different way of practicing and helping people because they use different theoretical modalities to create change in the clients that they're working with. And some of those modalities are more helpful for certain presenting issues than others. So just really like knowledge is power, and becoming informed about how all of this works will help you be able to make good choices about the most trustworthy growth guide for yourself through this process. So, speaking of support, I also always like to let people know that there is a bunch of other free resources available on my website to help you improve your relationships. If you go to growingself.com, you can access the blog and podcast section. And from there, you can enter into love, happiness, or success to find different content collections that I've put together for you to get more on the topics that we've been discussing today. I would invite you to go into the Love collection and check out Communication That Connects for lots of articles. And also, I put together podcast playlists for you in each section, so you have access to those. There's also a section around sexual and emotional intimacy that you'll find more resources through. And then in addition, there's a whole collection on articles and podcasts related to emotional intelligence. If listening to this has made you think yeah, I need to work on that. So just know it's all there for you. I made it for you, totally free, and you're welcome to come and check it out. But other than that, as we wrap up today's episode, just remember that even if this feels difficult or challenging, a growth mindset here is so helpful. Just reminding yourself, and maybe even also reminding your partner, this is something I'm working on. I'm developing in this area. I'm growing. I'm not doing it perfectly. I get better every day is something that I think can be really helpful. And also to do this work, self-awareness, self-reflection are both really key in developing these abilities, and just to be gentle with yourself and just know that creating emotional intimacy can be sometimes the scariest thing that any of us will ever do. It's based on vulnerability, which is by definition can be hard and uncomfortable, but also to know that it's really worth doing. If you want the kind of relationships you want, the kind of connection that you want, and the closeness that you want, that is actually the price of admission. So do the work. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was helpful for you. And if you have follow-up questions for me, comments, or, other topics or things you want to hear about on a next episode, come find me on YouTube, Instagram, all the usual places. I'd love to hear what's going on, and we will continue our conversation. All right. Talk to you later.